He never looked up when the helicopters flew overhead. Most people in town would pause, crane their necks, wonder where the medical choppers or news crews were heading. But Ray just kept his head down, kept his hands busy with whatever engine lay spread across his workbench. His co-workers at Murphy's Auto thought it was concentration. They had no idea it was survival. Until that Tuesday afternoon when a police helicopter made an emergency landing in the field behind the shop, and Ray moved faster than any 60-year-old mechanic should be able to. What happened in the next 4 minutes would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet man in the stained coveralls. Welcome to the Archiovo Occulto. Before we dive into this tale of hidden service and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like these need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep these voices alive. Murphy's Auto Repair sat on the edge of town, surrounded by cornfields and the kind of silence that city folks drive hours to find. It wasn't much to look at: a steel building with 4 bays, a gravel lot, and a hand-painted sign that had been fading for 20 years. But for Ray Martinez, it was perfect, anonymous, peaceful, the kind of place where a man could disappear into routine. Ray had worked there for 8 years, ever since he'd answered Murphy's Craigslist ad looking for an experienced mechanic. No references required, Murphy had said, just show me what you can do with a wrench. Ray had rebuilt a transmission that first day, worked in complete silence for 6 hours straight, then quietly asked if he could start Monday. Murphy never asked about his past, and Ray never volunteered. That suited them both fine. The other mechanics, Jake, a kid fresh out of trade school, and Tom, a local who'd been turning wrenches since the Carter administration, had learned not to pry. Ray was always the first to arrive, 6:30 a.m. sharp, coffee thermos in hand, and lunch packed in the same green canvas bag he'd carried for decades. He worked methodically, never rushed, never frustrated. While Jake and Tom complained about difficult jobs or impossible customers, Ray just worked. He had a gift for diagnosing problems that others missed, could listen to an engine for 30 seconds and tell you exactly what was wrong. But there were things about him that didn't quite add up. The way he kept his workspace organized with military precision, the way he never threw away a single zip tie or bolt, organizing everything into labeled containers, the way he moved, efficient, purposeful, like every motion had been practiced 1,000 times. Tom had noticed Ray's scars first. Not the usual mechanic scars from scraped knuckles and hot exhaust pipes. These were different. A long surgical line along his left forearm. Burn marks on his neck that looked like they came from something serious. And his hands, calloused in places that didn't match 20 years of automotive work. When helicopters passed overhead, which happened maybe once a month in their quiet corner of nowhere, Ray would go completely still. Not look up, not track their flight path like everyone else. He'd freeze until the rotor sound faded, then go back to work as if nothing had happened. That Tuesday started like any other. Ray was rebuilding a Chevy engine, Jake was fighting with a stubborn brake job, and Tom was on his 3rd cup of coffee while complaining about his ex-wife's lawyer. The radio played classic rock at low volume, and the afternoon sun streamed through the dirty windows, turning the motor oil rainbows on the concrete floor. At 2:47 p.m., they heard it. The unmistakable whop, whop, whop of rotor blades, but different, rough, struggling. Jake looked up first. "That doesn't sound right." Tom stepped outside. "Chopper's in trouble." The police helicopter appeared over the tree line, flying low and unsteady. Black smoke trailed from its engine compartment, and even from the ground, they could see it was fighting to stay airborne. The pilot was looking for somewhere to land. The field behind Murphy's was the only clear space for miles. Ray had gone completely rigid at his workbench, but as the helicopter committed to its emergency descent, something changed in him. The careful, methodical mechanic disappeared. In his place stood someone else entirely. Someone who knew exactly what a helicopter in distress needed. Ray was running before the helicopter touched down. Not jogging, not hurrying, running with the purposeful speed of someone trained for emergencies. He reached the landing site before Jake and Tom had even processed what was happening. The helicopter hit hard, bounced once, and settled with its rotors still spinning dangerously. Ray approached from the side, staying clear of the rotor wash, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. He signaled to the pilot, hand gestures that Jake didn't recognize but the pilot clearly did. Within seconds, the engines were shut down and the rotors began to slow. The pilot stumbled out, shaken but uninjured. "Engine's overheating," he called out. "Lost oil pressure, had to put her down." Ray was already moving around the aircraft, conducting what looked like a systematic inspection. He checked the engine cowling, examined the tail boom, tested the landing gear. His movements were confident, methodical, like he was working from a mental checklist. Jake and Tom arrived breathless. "Holy shit, Ray, where'd you learn to do that?" Jake gasped. But Ray wasn't listening. He was focused entirely on the helicopter, running his hands along surfaces, checking connections, diagnosing the problem. "Oil cooler line," Ray said finally. "Ruptured. You probably had about 2 minutes of flight time left before total failure." The pilot stared at him. "How do you know that? Are you a mechanic?" Ray looked uncomfortable suddenly, like he'd revealed more than he intended. "I work on engines," he said simply. But the pilot wasn't satisfied. "Not car engines, you know helicopters. That inspection you just did, that's by the book. Military book." Ray's jaw tightened. "I need to get back to work," he said, turning away. But the pilot grabbed his arm gently. "Wait, what's your name?" "Ray Martinez," he said reluctantly. The pilot studied his face. "Army? Navy? You move like military." Ray was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the disabled helicopter. "Long time ago," he said finally. "Different life." The pilot nodded slowly. "Well, that different life just saved mine. I was headed to County General. They've got a trauma case waiting for transport to the city. Kid in a car accident. If you hadn't guided me down clean—" He didn't finish the sentence. Ray looked toward town, toward the hospital. "How long for another helicopter?" 40 minutes, maybe more. Kid doesn't have 40 minutes. Ray was quiet, but Jake could see something working behind his eyes. "What about the oil cooler line? Can it be bypassed?" The pilot looked surprised. "Temporarily, yeah, but it would take someone who really knows the system. And even then, it's risky as hell. 10, maybe 15 minutes of flight time max." Ray walked back to the helicopter, popped the engine cowling, and stared at the mechanical maze inside. Tom whispered to Jake, "I've never seen him look at anything like that." Like he was reading a map he'd memorized years ago. Ray disappeared into his workshop and returned with a toolbox Jake had never seen before. Not his regular mechanic's tools. These were different. Specialized. Military grade. He worked on the helicopter engine with the same precision he brought to car repairs, but faster, more urgent. He bypassed the damaged oil cooler, rerouted the hydraulic lines, checked and double-checked every connection. The pilot watched in amazement. "Where did you serve?" he asked quietly. "Afghanistan," Ray answered without looking up. 3 tours. Combat engineer. Maintained everything that flew, rolled, or exploded. 15 minutes later, the helicopter was running again. Not perfectly, but well enough. Ray stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. "She'll fly, but keep it low and slow. Don't push her." The pilot performed a quick systems check, then looked at Ray with something approaching awe. "You just saved a kid's life, you know that?" Ray didn't answer. He was already walking back toward the shop, but the pilot called after him. "What unit were you with in Afghanistan?" Ray stopped, his shoulders tense. 160th SOAR, he said without turning around. "Night Stalkers." Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the garage. Jake and Tom stood in stunned silence as the helicopter lifted off, heading toward County General and the kid who needed emergency transport. 160th SOAR. Jake pulled out his phone and Googled it. What he found made his hands shake. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, the most elite helicopter unit in the U.S. Army. These were the guys who flew Navy SEALs into Pakistan to get bin Laden. The guys who flew missions so classified they didn't exist on paper. And Ray, quiet, methodical Ray, who never talked about anything more exciting than carburetor settings, had been one of them. They found Ray at his workbench, back to the Chevy engine like nothing had happened, but his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his tools. "Ray," Tom said carefully, "we had no idea." Ray didn't look up. Nothing to know. Ancient history. But Jake couldn't let it go. The Night Stalkers, man. That's some serious stuff. How many missions did you fly? Ray's hands went still on the wrench. "Enough," he said quietly. "Too many." The weight of those words settled over the garage like a heavy blanket. Too many. Too many friends who didn't come home. Too many night flights into hostile territory. Too many things no one should have to see. Over the following days, word spread through the small town. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way news travels in places where everybody knows everybody. Ray Martinez wasn't just the quiet mechanic at Murphy's. He was a war hero, a Night Stalker who'd saved lives in the mountains of Afghanistan, who'd flown into hell and back more times than anyone should have to. People started treating him differently, not with pity or excessive gratitude, but with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Murphy started getting calls from helicopter pilots needing work done. Seemed Ray's reputation was spreading. The changes were subtle but real. Veterans from the VFW post started stopping by the shop, not for car repairs, but just to talk. Ray was uncomfortable with the attention at first, but gradually he began to open up. Not about missions or classified operations, but about the mechanics of flight, the brotherhood of service, the challenge of keeping complex machines running in impossible conditions. Jake watched him transform during these conversations. Still quiet, still careful, but more present somehow. Like he was remembering parts of himself he'd deliberately forgotten. 3 weeks later, another emergency brought everything full circle. A teenage girl, daughter of one of the local farmers, had been thrown from her horse. Head trauma, possible spinal injury. The medical helicopter was delayed by weather and time was critical. Ray got the call because he was now on the county's emergency response list, the only person within 50 miles certified to work on aircraft. The helicopter that responded was the same one he'd repaired weeks earlier, the same pilot who'd watched him work magic with wrenches and determination. But this time was different. The helicopter was running rough again, not an emergency landing, but not optimal either. "Same oil cooler system," the pilot explained. "Different line this time. I was hoping—" Ray was already reaching for his specialized toolbox. 20 minutes, he said. "Maybe 30 if we do it right this time." But as he worked, Jake noticed something new. Ray was talking, explaining what he was doing, why each step mattered, teaching the pilot about preventive maintenance. The quiet mechanic was sharing his knowledge, passing on skills that had taken decades to master. That evening, after the girl had been safely transported to the city and was expected to make a full recovery, Ray sat on the front steps of the shop with Jake and Tom, watching the sunset over the cornfields. "You know what the hardest part was?" Ray said suddenly. "After I got out, I mean." Jake and Tom waited. Learning to fix things for people who were going home to their families. In Afghanistan, every repair, every mission, someone's life was on the line. Come back here and you're fixing someone's commuter car so they can get to their office job. Took me years to understand that matters too. But today, Ray continued, Fixing that chopper so a kid could get the help she needed, that felt like the old days. Like what I used to do mattered here too. Tom spit into the gravel. Always mattered, Ray. We just didn't know how much. Jake nodded. Those pilots, they're talking about setting up a proper maintenance contract. Helicopters from all over the region. You could be fixing aircraft again full time. Ray was quiet for a moment. Maybe, but I think I like it better this way. Cars and trucks most of the time, saving lives when needed. Feels more balanced. Over the next few months, Murphy's auto transformed. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. Ray took on a teaching role, training Jake and Tom in advanced hydraulics and electrical systems, skills that transferred from aircraft to automobiles. Veterans started stopping by regularly, and Ray began mentoring younger mechanics who'd served overseas and struggled to find purpose in civilian jobs. The shop became an unofficial gathering place for people who understood the weight of service and the challenge of coming home. Ray never flew again. His days as a Night Stalker pilot were over. But his hands still held the knowledge, his mind still carried the precision, and his heart still held the commitment to service that had defined his military years. He'd found a way to honor his past without being trapped by it, to use his skills for good, without the weight of combat operations. The quiet mechanic had become something more, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of specialized knowledge, a man who'd learned that coming home didn't mean forgetting who you'd been overseas. 1 year later, the county officially designated Murphy's Auto as an emergency aircraft maintenance facility. Ray had earned certifications, brought his military training up to civilian standards, and built a reputation among pilots throughout the region. But more than that, he'd built a community. The garage wasn't just a place where engines got fixed anymore. It was a place where veterans found purpose, where young mechanics learned skills that could save lives, where the precision and dedication of military service found new expression in civilian life. The scars were still there, the surgical line on his forearm, the burn marks on his neck, the memories that made him freeze when helicopters passed overhead. But they were part of his story now, not secrets to be hidden. When young mechanics asked about his military service, Ray would tell them what he could. Not the classified details, not the missions that existed only in redacted files, but the principles that guided elite aviation maintenance. Attention to detail, respect for the machine, understanding that someone's life depends on your work being perfect every time. Some men leave the service and spend decades trying to forget what they learned. Others carry the weight so heavily it breaks them. But Ray Martinez had found a third path: integration. He'd taken the skills that made him one of the Army's elite aviation specialists and adapted them for a different kind of service. Every helicopter he repaired, every young mechanic he trained, every emergency response that succeeded because his work was flawless, it all connected back to those 3 tours in Afghanistan, to the Night Stalkers who'd trusted him to keep them flying in the darkest missions. The quiet mechanic at Murphy's Auto had never really left the military. He'd just found a way to serve that didn't require uniforms or classified missions. In a workshop filled with the smell of motor oil and the sound of pneumatic tools, surrounded by cornfields instead of mountains, Ray Martinez continued the mission that had defined his military years, keeping aircraft airworthy so that others could complete their missions safely. The setting had changed, but the service continued. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some wear coveralls stained with motor oil, work with tools instead of weapons, and find ways to serve their community long after their military service has ended. Ray Martinez had discovered that the skills learned in elite military units don't become obsolete when you come home. They just find new applications. His precision, his knowledge, his commitment to excellence had all transferred from military aircraft to civilian emergencies, from combat zones to cornfields, from serving his country to serving his neighbors. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Ray Martinez? A veteran who seemed to be living quietly, working a regular job, but who carried extraordinary skills and experience beneath the surface. Someone who'd found a way to continue serving without fanfare or recognition? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the mechanics, the teachers, the workers who once wore uniforms but now channel their military training into civilian service. Because at The Human Stories, we believe that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It just changes form. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it. Help us honor the veterans who continue to serve in ways we might never notice. And the next time you meet a mechanic, a technician, someone whose hands move with unusual precision and whose eyes hold depths you can't quite read, remember, they might be carrying skills forged in the crucible of military service, now dedicated to keeping our civilian world running safely. Their service continues, even if we can't always see it.